Well, welcome today. I get the chance today of introducing Keith Reichert, which is somebody I think a lot of us know. I've been with him or worked with him on and off now for a number of years, and there's certain types of projects where you get to really know somebody. The kind of projects where if it's a Saturday night and midnight and you're working, if it's a Sunday most of the day and you're still working. We worked on a project once where the schedule was pretty aggressive, and then all of a sudden it got tripled in size and the schedule got pulled down by a factor of 2, which means things got uncomfortable. And there was an awful lot of work, and Keith's the kind of guy that just digs in. Things get uncomfortable, he digs in and goes and figures it out. And sometimes it's the little things that can make a difference in a project. And he's always been a good one to dig in and find out the details no matter what it is. Now, WiX is one of those things that you kind of go, what in the heck is it? Well, if it's Microsoft, it's probably with XML of some sort. They love XML. And if it's installer stuff, it's probably XML kind of generated junk. Now, that's my guess because I don't know much about WiX, so I always depended on Keith to do that kind of work. So if he embarrasses me, well, that's okay. Keith is one of those that commutes in the Springfield area from quite a distance. He has 2 children and a wife who can be sometimes feisty, but she seems pretty nice. And he has worked in everything from like little mini mainframes all the way up through probably Visual Basic kinds of things and doing C and video types of things, and now he's working at Pension Gold at LRS. So I'd like to give a welcome to Keith Reichert.
Thanks, Mark. Okay. Like Mark said, what really is WiX? Sure, unless you've had to be on a project where the last minute you found out, we need to make sure we have an installer for this thing we've been building, you probably don't know what it is. But I'm going to try to enlighten you a little bit tonight and get into some of the basics that will help you build your first Windows installer if it is. So a little bit of background. WiX stands for Windows Installer XML. It was Microsoft's very first open source project and has recently been moved off to the Outer Curve Foundation. It is a replacement for the old setup and deployment project type in Visual Studio, which if any of you have had to work with that and maintain a project that used that, it can be a real pain. It makes it kind of nice because WiX makes it pretty nice because they give you templates that you can use within Visual Studio to build and maintain your installer. It does require Visual Studio 2005 or newer. Hopefully you're not still stuck on those, but if you are, I'm sorry. There's some somewhat decent, there's some fairly good documentation out on the WiX site, which you can get to at wixtoolset.org. It is open source, so besides that, you can find a lot of blog posts and a lot of different entries out there. The problem comes down to finding answers to particular problems you might be having. There's a lot to it, so you can kind of get overwhelmed if you're not careful. But I would highly recommend if you have to do build any installers using WiX to go ahead and pick up this this book here by Nick Ramirez. I wish I would have had this 6 years ago when I first started using it, because it really lays out the guts of what you need to know to get going with it. And it goes deep too. So you can start out not knowing very much and progress to some more advanced topics in there. All right, now there's some pros and cons to WiX. Number one pro is it's free. It's open source. So you don't have to go get permission from your manager to for a purchase request for this, you can get it and install it with Visual Studio. It's open source, and the community behind it is actually very active. They've taken WiX and extended it to multiple, not platforms, but multiple like trouble areas that you might have during an install. For example, SQL Server, if you need to run any sort of SQL script during your install, there's an extension out there for that can help you do that. You don't have to worry about creating your own custom deployment actions and try to integrate those in. There's a lot of nice extensions for that. Like I got here, SQL, IIS, PowerShell, all extended onto the base WiX toolset. One of the big bonuses that I have come out with this is the fact that it is source control friendly. It's all markup, so it's all XML defining what your output Windows installer should look like. Now, what that means is that whenever you make any changes to it and check it in, you can go and do a diff on those and see what changed when. It makes it really nice for tracking down installer problems, which usually come at, or go live date is tomorrow, and has anybody tried the installer? Oh no, let's try it out now, and so you kind of track down the problems, who put in the bug, and chastise them for it at that point. Now the cons to this is there is a slight learning curve, and like I said, it can be difficult to find the documentation you want online, and also if you're wanting to develop for anything but Windows, you're out of luck here. It is Windows installer, so you're building Windows installers. So, all right, I'm going to jump in and show you a demo now. All right, and what I've got here is I've got a solution with 4 projects in it. Well, 5 if you count test. These bottom 3 are my application that I've built, and I want to go ahead and build an installer for it. So I would go to, add new project. And in my templates, I've got a setup project right here for that. So go ahead and put in the information you need and add it. You end up with this right here. Now the guts of this, there's not much to it really. It may not look that way to you guys right now, but there really isn't much to it. In essence, all this markup is defining what your Windows installer needs to look like, what properties it needs to have on it, what contents need to go into it, etc. Product is defining the actual product that you're installing. Makes sense. So in this case, the name of my application is SVNUG Demo App. What version it is, who the manufacturer is, and an upgrade code. Now, of everything on this product line, the most important thing to understand is upgrade code. Between versions, so I have version 1 of my demo app out there. I build an installer. This is the upgrade code that goes with it. I go ahead and I implement new features and update my version to version 2. Upgrade code does not change. This is what's going to link any previous installs to your new install to make sure that those are your changes are applied over top of it. So it'll see it as the same application. Package information. This is information about the installer itself. Most of this you can ignore. The most important part here, though, is install scope. This is going to tell it to either be installed per machine or per user. And One note, one gotcha that I found is that the default for this is per user. So if you leave out this attribute, your install is per user no matter what. If you then catch that on a later version and say, you know what, these need to always be per machine, anytime that it goes to upgrade it, you're going to end up with two installed versions on that machine. One that's installed and per user and one that's per machine. So don't do that. So it's a pain to try to clean up. The rest of this is just, you know, additional information about the installer itself, the MSI package. Major upgrade. This defines, you know, what do you want to show when you've already got a newer version installed if somebody tries to install an older version. Media template. It's defining the actual files that you add to it are going to be placed in a cab file. If you leave this as embedded cab no, it'll go ahead and have your MSI file and then a separate cab file there along with it. If you go ahead and set it to yes, it'll include it in the MSI, so you'll have just one file for your install. If you need to do anything on multiple disks, you would have to set this up and do a little bit more work of defining which files go into which cab, so you can then have those placed on different disks if need be. Hopefully you don't have to mess with that. You define features for your install. In my case, we only have one. All my components are going to be installed under the same thing, but if you need to set up your install with a selection for, okay, I need all the base controls plus these additional logging features or something as separate, you can set those up as separate features and have it only deploy what you select. UI. Now out of the box, there's a few different options for this. I'm going with the very basic one. It's going to give you a selection of whether or not you agree with the terms, show your little legalese on there, and then continue with the install. There's several other ones you can do, and this is a list of them. Mondo is everything under the sun. It'll have where do you want to install it, what set of features do you want to install from this, all that stuff built into the UI for it. But to get started, definitely use minimal. It'll help you get used to what it's doing. So, directory, you set up your directory structure in here. Target directory has to be the root of this every time, and then nested within it, you would more than likely have program files and then the name of your install folder within there where you want it to go. So in this case, in the install folder, or in the programs folder, I should have an SVNUG demo app subfolder that contains my deployed app. Don't worry about this fragment stuff right now. We'll get to that in a moment. But component groups. Component group contains components. Every component has to have a file in it. One key part to this is you can have multiple files in a component, but you can only have one file that has key path set to yes. What that does is when you do a repair, when you go ahead and run your installer, something's wrong, you want to do a repair on your installation, the only files that get redeployed are the ones that have key path of yes. So if you try to get fancy and say, well, I have this one component that really uses these multiple files, you could be really messing yourself up because only one of those is going to be redeployed. So you lose the other ones, or end up with one of those being the one that's actually bad that should have been replaced. And that's kind of that's the guts of it. There's 9 files, I think, here that get deployed. When you build this, we go out and take a look at the output of it. I end up with an MSI, and then I have a PDB for the WiX symbols themselves. All you need is this MSI to actually run. Let's take a look at what it looks like. So this is that default minimal UI that comes with it out of the box. Get this pretty logo in here. All this can actually be changed as well. You can set what you want to use for the banners and all this stuff. And I go ahead and I say accept. Install it. Yes, I'm sure. Runs through, does a bunch of stuff in the background and says, okay, I'm done. Now this one was so basic I didn't even have it create a shortcut for me or anything. You can do all those sorts of things you would expect. But if I go out to my program files, take a look, we should have the output in there. Right here, there's my SVNUG demo app under program files. And there's all my deployed files in there. This is the app. Now, the best way to learn this is to start off small. In fact, when I created my very first installer, it installed a text file. That's all it did. Just figuring out what all the different XML meant within there and what the gotchas are. It's kind of how I have to go about it. Go back to the slide real quick here. So, key things to take away from this. Product, all these are the different tags for your XML. Product tag, the ID, leave the ID as star. It'll automatically generate it anytime you build. And never change the upgrade code unless you are actually wanting to have an upgrade where you're no longer compatible with the prior version. Package, the install scope, defaults to per user. That can get you. More than likely you're going to want it set to per machine. At least in our case, that was the requirement. Embed, like I said, with the embed tags. The UI extension. Now, in order to get the decent looking UI for that, you have to go ahead and import in an assembly, one of the extension assemblies. If you take a look here, WiX UI extension, that's part of when you install WiX, it puts all those assemblies out there. You can just go and add reference to that assembly, which then gives you the ability to set this UI ref. So just by adding that UI ref to ID of minimal is what allowed you to change the look of it. If you don't put that in there and you don't go with one of those UIs, you end up with an install that just comes up and says, go ahead and install, and it just is done. Doesn't let you know anything, is going on. Components and file. Like I said, with the key path, the rule of thumb is only have one file per component. And the other thing that I didn't mention, but it can help you out down the road, is your naming of the components. If you go ahead and prefix the components different from the file, and then use the rest of this to just name what the file is. You can see here where my source is getting it. So the name of my file is actually part of the ID. That helps if you have to track down any problems after the fact. So, and I believe that is pretty much it. If you do have problems, the Windows SDK, there is a tool called Orca EXE. And I think it stands for One Really Cool App. Anyway, what it allows you to do is go ahead and open and edit an existing MSI file. You can see all the tables that are in there. That's where the naming of those components and files helps, because you can look in the table and see it match up to what you named it, instead of some of the defaults are like GUIDs, trying to match up a GUID and you don't know what the heck it is. So I suggest getting a hold of that. And don't do like I was just doing, where you test it by just running the install on your development box. Because if the install dies at a bad place, you could end up with registry entries that are orphaned, and if you run it like a bunch of times trying to figure out what's going on, you could have a whole list of programs that are supposedly installed that Windows thinks are installed that you can't get rid of. So use a virtual machine. And there's also a way to turn on logging, so whenever for your install itself. I have a script for this. If you guys are interested, let me know. It basically turns on the logging, runs your install for you, and then after the install is done, it turns it off so you don't ever forget, and then brings it up so you can see exactly what's happening within there. So, yeah.
A question on that is, you said that there was debug symbols. Can you actually step through and debug the install process?
Yes, you can.
Cool.
Yes, you can. Well,
logging might be just as good.
yes. Logging, for these typical ones, logging was always more beneficial for me anyway. When we get to part 2 over the Bootstrapper, you can debug right into that as well. Very simple.
I have 2 questions, actually. First of all, can this create exe files in addition to the MSI for installers, or is it just MSIs?
Typically your EXEs are a bootstrap.
Okay.
That are, you run that and it kicks off and then runs yours.
Right.
I'm not sure. You might actually be able to do that as well. But that would be in the properties. Look at there.
There we go.
Yes, you can. So you can create MSIs, merge modules. WiX libraries, this is essentially a replacement for merge modules. You can set up a core set of components that you need to install like you would a merge module, and then pull them in on your next WiX project just by referencing the library. So.
And then my second question is on the components in your project. Did you have to create all that by hand, or was there a tool to help pull in all the components and
Yeah,
everything?
let me show you
Component
what
information.
Let me show you what happens when you actually fire this up. So if I do new project now, and I go to the WiX installer and I select my setup project, create an MSI based installer. It puts the majority of that product file in there for you. So you can see here, and it gives you some information. Component groups, this is where my components go. Insert files, all the other stuff there. The basic for my directory tree, as well as a lot of the information here. If I try to build this now, yeah. Manufacturers never showed up, so you get sorry, it wasn't supposed to drop off. So it tells you, you can't build it without setting the manufacturer. Anyway.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey Keith, I have a question about the components in the XML.
Mm-hmm.
You said, can you go back to that? You said you prefixed all those with like CMP_FIL, so you had to go in there and manually do that, or could you tell it to prefix everything?
You know what? There probably is a way to do that. There is a tool. The WiX Toolset, there's a whole set of different pieces to it. One of the tools is called Heat, which what it allows you to do is you can take it and run it against a directory, and it'll take a look at that directory, find all the files that are in that, and generate a fragment. So it could basically generate this fragment right here. There's a lot of different command line arguments you can put on that to tell it, okay, I need it to create GUIDs for each one of them, or I need to, different naming type things like that. There may be a way to do that as well, where you have it prefix it as well, but I'm not positive on that. There's a lot that it can do that you just don't know until you need it. Oh, that's something else I should mention. There's that heat tool. There's another tool, I believe it's Harvest. That might not be the right name, but you can take and have it generate the XML for you, the WiX code for you from an existing MSI file. So it'll take a look through there and give you a fragment of what's all in there, which is useful. It's useful for figuring out, you know what, they did a pretty good job on this installer. How did they do some of this stuff? And you can, do some reverse engineering. So.
I have a question. What are the sort of typical problems you get when you run an installer?
There's typical ones. I'm not sure about typical. I know that majority of the time when I end up with an installer that fails, it gives you some error message that means absolutely nothing to you, and you go out and you try to find it. The majority of the times that I get that, I fire up the logger to go ahead and log while it installs, and then backtrack as far as where I find there was an error, and see if it makes, see if I can find where in my WiX code that's could have been coming from, or where it's near anyway. Trying to think of some of the actual problems that I had to track down. When using the extensions, like when you are using like the SQL extension to run a script on the database connection could be a problem. Your network is too slow or is down when you try to run it, when it tries to resolve the server and stuff along those lines. The logging, the error message that comes up for that is not useful at all, but the logging actually helps track that down.
Is this code imperative? Is it executed in the order it occurs in the file?
That's a good question. For the most part, yes. I have seen times where my assumed order is switched, because for one thing, you don't have to have it all in one file. Essentially, any of these places where you have a fragment, you can set that in another file, and when you have those sort of things happening, it doesn't load any of the contents of that until it finds a property in here that resides in there, and that time it'll then load it in. So I think some of that can change the order in which that stuff occurs. But if you do have issues where you have to have a specific order for things, the majority of these, let's see if I can, have attributes on them for, where is it? Probably not component. Maybe it's on file. There's a condition. But it's here. Oh. Don't believe it. Somewhere in here, there's a condition attribute. So you can basically tie that to, whether or not it is found that this file exists, or, based on those sorts of things. So you can do some of that to, set the order in which things occur. It's probably on the feature, my guess. Anybody else? All right. Thank you. Next thing I want to talk about is one of the additional features that has been added to WiX in the latter versions for creating a bootstrapper. Now, Bootstrapper, for those of you that don't know, is a pre-install process for installing any prerequisites that your primary application might need. So if your application needs to have SQL Server, a local instance of SQL Server installed, you would have to do that in a Bootstrapper before you run your application. One of the problems one of the challenges, I guess, to creating a nice installer where you have a lot of prerequisites is to make it look professional when you've got 10 different prerequisites that have their own install, so they have a different look to them, very disjointed when you run it, and it pops up and says, okay, I'm going to install the C runtime now, and then that kind of goes away and something else comes up that looks completely different that's installing SQL Server or any, some third-party components or something along those lines. The WiX Bootstrapper, it uses another one of the tools within there called Burn. And what it allows you to do is have a unified look to your install. So when you run this Bootstrap, it looks like this is just my install. You don't care about, it's doing all this other stuff behind the scenes to get prerequisites installed. It just looks like, you have a single experience with it. They created a new project type in Visual Studio for the Bootstrap, and it allows you to chain multiple installs together. So I have my product install, I have an install for SQL Server, I have another install for some other component, all these different MSIs. One of the limitations of the MSI install type is that you cannot launch another MSI from within it. The Bootstrapper is how you get around that. So it's kind of like managing or orchestrating your list of installs that you want to run. So the different supported types, you can have an installer to chain in that's an MSI or another executable. They can be patches, MSPs, or updates, the MSU install type. All those are supported in the box with this. And one of the really nice things about what WiX has done is they allow you to customize the UI itself, and you can use WPF to do that. So that's right up my alley. As soon as I saw that, I thought, wow, there's a lot you could do there to make it, really nice. So let's go ahead and jump in and take a look at some of the code for this. All right, so my solution has two projects in it. Bootstrapper, which it's created. Let's go ahead and do this right out the bat this time. By doing a new project, and under your Windows Installer XML, there's a Bootstrapper project type. And let's put that not in the same place. And that gives you kind of similar to what, if you're building a setup, it's going to go ahead and shell out a bunch of the markup for you. Very similar bundle. It's describing the actual Bootstrap itself, information about it. So you can version it. Upgrade code works similar to that as well, so you can upgrade as you go. You want that to stay the same so it knows how to match them up on a reinstall. The Bootstrapper application ref. This is telling it what UI do I want to use for my Bootstrapper. The default is this RTF license. So it looks very similar to where it comes up, it shows you the license information. You say, yeah, I agree, and then go on. So it looks very similar. And then chain. This is where all the money goes. This is where you put in a list of all of the different installs that you want, and the order in which you place them in here dictates what order they get installed. Okay? So let me jump back over to the live one. So ignore this for now. And ignore that as well. So here in this example, I've got 2 prerequisite installs that I want to run prior to the install that we just created. Okay? So it's going to run through, it's going to do prereq 1, followed by prereq 2, and then get to the one that we just created. You'll notice here that the Bootstrapper application ref has been changed. It's no longer that RTF license. Manage Bootstrapper application host. By setting that value for the ID, it's telling it, I want to use WPF as my front end for my UI. I'll get to the rest of this here after I show you the other project. The other project in this solution is, it's just a C# assembly. It's a DLL. This has my view code in it. Okay, so if you're familiar with WPF, I'm using the MVVM pattern. I've got a view, and it has a view model that it binds to get any changes for any values that you want to display. And the view model is hooked up to a model that has any underlying data access you need to run or anything like that. Now, in order to get the wrong one. Okay, so in order to hook this up to the managed host, one of the requirements is you create a class in your custom UI assembly that implements this Bootstrapper application. Now that comes from, there's a reference that you get to an assembly called Bootstrapper Core. That comes from WiX itself when you install it. You add that reference to it, you can now override the underlying Bootstrapper application that drives the actual install process. Okay? In here, you'll notice that there's only one override on this class that's needed. And what we do is we want to, for WPF, a lot of times you need to get a hold of the dispatcher that's the thread that is the UI is running on. So if you have any processing going on in the background that you run through it and then based on an event need to update the user interface from a separate thread, you need to go ahead and invoke that on the dispatcher. So we go ahead and grab a hold of the dispatcher that the UI is running on, so we can do that easily from anywhere within the app. The rest of this is just simply hooking up, doing WPF hooking up your model view and view model. I'm instantiating a model. I'll show you that here in a minute. I'm instantiating a view model, instantiating my view, and I'm setting the data context on my view to that view model. So that's going to allow it the bindings to work through there. And then I'm also I'm doing a little bit of a hack here to hook into the closed event on the view itself on the window. That when that happens, I want to go ahead and tell the underlying Bootstrapper application that, hey, I'm done, I'm canceling out, kill it. So not just close the window and still have that running in the background. The rest of this is kind of boilerplate for for the Bootstrapper. You need to grab a hold of the window that the view is running in. It uses that for passing it on down below to the Bootstrapper application. Detect. This fires off a set of code to make sure that the installs that you are going to be running find out if it exists or not. So in this case, we want to make sure that our application isn't already installed on there before it tries to install over the top of it. And then the rest of this is just go ahead and show the view and run through it. The model. The constructor for the model, you're passing in the Bootstrapper application. Okay, what that gives us access to is the underlying engine of the install itself. And kind of the steps that occur when the Bootstrap runs is you tell it, okay, I need to plan for an install of this product. So it runs through and it evaluates that MSI and says, okay, these are all the things that, it passes the requirements to install it. Following the plan, there's the actual execution of it. So it's, plan it, then execute it. Or, I'm sorry, plan, then apply. But that's really what it's doing. It's actually executing it. So what the model is doing here is wrapping those underlying method calls for plan of a particular action and applying whatever action you had planned. It's wrapping them for you. There's also a nice log that you can hook into so that you can send messages that get logged out to the installer log as you're going through. All right. My view model is actually pretty basic. I've got 3 commands. I've got my install, I got my uninstall, and cancel. I have to keep track of what state the install is in, which I'm using this enum to do, whether I'm initializing. Present and non-present is what it uses to determine whether or not I can install or, hey, it's already there. My only choice is to uninstall it. Applying is when it's actually, you've called apply, so it's doing its work. Cancel, of course, is you've kicked cancel or some underlying problem occurred and it automatically canceled, so it'll drop out. I've got a property for message where what I'm using it for is just to show what my current state is. State, of course, anytime it changes, you have to run through and change it. And I tried to hook up an overall progress to it as well. Now, the problem with this demo is that I don't have enough going on in the installs. So it gets done too quick to show the progress, I believe. I think that's what's happening at least. So maybe I can figure out a way to do that at another point. My constructor for my view model, I go ahead and set it to initializing when it starts up. I wire up the event handlers and I initialize my commands. This is very typical of WPF. The wire up is setting up event handlers to the underlying Bootstrapper application. So it's basically I'm using its wrapper to go ahead and hook into the underlying event to go ahead and capture and process what's going on at that point. That's what every one of these does. And initializing commands, it's very similar. I've got what do I want to do when this command is run, and can I actually run it? So on the install, it will only allow you to install it or show the install as being an option if the install state is not present, so it didn't find it there already. Similarly, the uninstall has it only if it's present. and a shutdown. This is hooking into the dispatcher to go ahead and kill it. All right, let's go ahead and build this, take a look at what the output looks like. All right, so I've got my executable, Bootstrapper executable. Now this project also has the ability, you can select an MSI as the output type of this, but I think that might be an oversight in their template. Because if you try that, it tells you you have to have a package. It's looking, I think it's trying to do an actual, just a regular install at that point, instead of a Bootstrap. But if we run this, now you'll see my UI, beautiful UI. Got my install. Uninstall is grayed out because it doesn't exist. And got my cancel. And a nice progress bar that doesn't show you anything at this point. The state of it, showing what the state is. You wouldn't do this in yours, but it helps to kind of debug, figure out what's going on. Saying it's not present, so that means that which buttons are available makes sense. All right, so now when I install this, acts just like a regular installer. It's applying, so I can't click either of these. It's done. Now if we take a look at what actually happened, if we go and look in programs and features, you'll notice right here we have one entry for SVNUG demo toolset. That's the name I gave the Bootstrapper. And there aren't any other ones in there. So those other two prerequisites and even the application that we built don't show up as separate entries in there. And you can change that. You can have them all show if you want as separate. But this allows you to go ahead and have the installs that you have bundled together can actually be managed together, so that if I go and do an uninstall, it can go through and uninstall all of those as well. So now if we come back and let me show you one other thing real quick here. And if we take a look at program files, here I've got my two prerequisites. So they show up as, where their install said they should go. I didn't show you those, but that's where they go. And then the demo app shows up just like it did from the MSI that was in there. So it doesn't create just a single folder, doesn't have to do any kind of a directory matching or anything in there. All right, so if I go ahead and fire this up again, okay, now I can't install. I can only uninstall because it's already there. Fire it up, does the same thing. Now, the entry from programs and features is gone, and the files under program files are gone as well. So I got rid of all three of them. So now, unfortunately, that's all that I've got to show you for tonight. I did not get to do as thorough a job on this as I had hoped. I had hoped to actually have an application or an install for this that looked more like a typical professional install that you'd have, but trying to figure out how everything was working took more time than I expected. So, are there any questions on this? All right, thanks.